Hello there, my name is Sarah, and I'm reading Secret City by Jan Andrew Henderson. This is chapter 12, The Body Snatcher. Charlie turned the page, but there was nothing else written in the book. He flicked through the rest of Peasel's diary, but from that point on, the journal was blank. He stood up, ignoring Lily, pacing around the theatre floor. The girl sat and waited, running a small silver ball over her fingers from one hand to another. Finally, Charlie turned to her tight-lipped. "There is no way I'm believing that," he burst out. "There's no way I'm believing that there's some kind of monster trapped at the bottom of the underground city." Lily stayed quiet. "I know what you're thinking. That tapping I heard when I was underground was the sound of Mordred's hooves. You think he heard me and he came running up the passageway below?" "You don't know what I think." "Well, it's rubbish. That noise I heard was council workers digging, just like you said." "Could be," Lily shrugged. "I wasn't down there." "I don't believe in that kind of stuff. The journal must just be a hoax." "Oh, sit down, Charlie," Lily said. "Trying to make sense out of this and walk at the same time is freaking you out." The boy slouched back down and patted his knees, nervously blowing out his cheeks. "All right," said after a while. "Just suppose the diary is right. I'm just saying suppose. I'm not saying it is." He began to get up again, but Lily pulled him back down. "All right, suppose," she said. "What are you going to do?" "All I have to do is make sure that nobody ever finds Shadow Jack's vault again. I mean, Mordred's still trapped, isn't he? I'll go down and cover the smelting forge and hide the stairway I found that leads to the vault, put the stones back, put everything back the way it was." He smiled hopefully at Lily. "If there is some sort of horrible creature down there, well, that'll keep it hidden for another 200 years. "Yeah, I suppose it would," said Lily. "If it wasn't for the fact that there are council workers digging straight towards him. If they break through into the bottom level, Mordred will surely kill them." "That guy stays angry for a long time, eh? Worse still, he'll be out." "Couldn't we just tell the police or the army or something?" the boy suggested. "What? Tell them what? You discovered a 1,000-year-old troll living under the streets of Edinburgh. They're not likely to believe that." "Yeah, I know the feeling." "You have to do something. So what if he does get out?" Charlie was clutching at straws now. How dangerous can he be? Magic or not, he's only one creature. The girl looked deep into his eyes. "What if he breaks out when your parents are performing in the big top?" Charlie leapt to his feet. "What do you expect me to do? Take him on hand-to-hand combat? I'm only a kid." Lily pointed to Peasel's diary. "2 boys about your age once managed to beat a whole army of trolls. Yet with the help of a magic sword and a blacksmith the size of Mount Everest." With a flick of her wrist, Lily sent the silver ball whizzing towards Charlie's head. He plucked it out of the air within an inch of his nose, blinking in surprise. "What the hell did you do that for?" "Your parents are acrobats," you said. "Look at how easily you caught that ball. You've inherited their speed and their eye." "I'd rather my parents were big game hunters and I'd inherited their guns. What am I supposed to fight this thing with? My teeth?" He gave the girl a sarcastic look. "I've got silver fillings. Do you think that'll help?" Lily didn't get the joke. Only fairy silver will work against these kind of creatures. "But you're on the right track. You have to think of what you have on your side, Charlie, not what you don't." "I've got you. You want to come into the underground city with me?" "No, not a chance." "I thought not," the boy said dryly. "But thanks for your support." He flipped the ball back. "Charlie, I didn't mean it like that." I've got to think about this." Charlie strode towards the theatre exit. "I have to go somewhere and work this out. It's not that I'm stupid or a coward." He opened the door, letting in a flood of sunlight. "It's just that I'm scared to death and don't have a clue what to do." He stepped into the light without bothering to say goodbye. The door closed with a click, leaving Lily sitting alone in the gloomy big top. She took out 3 more silver balls and began to juggle them. 13, then 15, then 17, spinning faster and faster, despite the half-light. One of the silver balls hit the edge of her finger and shot away at an awkward angle. She tried to recapture the moment, clutching at empty air, but another ball deflected off her wrist and vanished under the chair. Next moment, All the balls were bouncing across the floor away from the astonished girl. Lily looked at her hands. Not fair, she said to no one in particular. Not fair at all. Charlie sat in his room at the boarding house. He'd been there for hours staring at the wall, though his parents had interrupted him a couple of times and tried unsuccessfully to make conversation. Wednesday tomorrow, his father said. Big Top's shut, so I thought about taking you on a day trip. There's a pencil museum in Lerwick. Oh, I'd love to go, Charlie said. Really? You would? Yes, but I can't, Charlie thought fast. I have to meet a girl. A girl, eh? Said his father. You think a girl will be more fun than a pencil museum? Don't tease the boy. Charlie's mum somersaulted onto the bed beside her son, and they both bounced up and down for a few seconds. What would you like to know about the facts of life? Nothing, mother. We'll probably just go for a Coke. Ah, young love, his mum nudged him, wrinkling her nose. Do you think about her a lot? As a matter of fact, I've thought about nothing else all evening. Charlie looked up at his mother, and I don't think she's being very honest. I think she's been using me. Oh, baby. His mother suddenly looked serious, which didn't happen very often. Are you going to be all right? You want to talk about it? For a second, Charlie considered telling his parents the whole story, just giving them Peasel's journal to read and then climbing into bed and going to sleep. Let them work out what was real and what was not and what he should do. He looked at his father hopefully. His father made a high whinnying noise, his cheeks vibrating violently. That is my impression of a horse, he said. I can only do it with one side of my mouth. Charlie turned to his mother. It's okay, he said, patting her hand. Everything is okay. You have a talk with this young lady. Don't let her walk all over you. I don't intend to. Good. Well, you have fun tomorrow. Dad and I can have a long lie and go shopping instead. Charlie's dad sighed. Finally, his parents went to bed and left Charlie to his thoughts. He was sick to his stomach about what he'd learnt, and he had racked his brains in vain for a logical explanation. He felt betrayed by Lily, even though he hardly knew her, and he felt lonely. He'd come to think of Peasel and Duncan as friends, and now that the diary was finished, he would never know what happened to them. Did they take Excalibur to Glasgow and sell it? Did they become rich like they'd dreamt? Or had Peasel succumbed to an illness that was obviously killing him? Charlie opened the pickpocket's diary and flipped through it again. At the back was the pickpocket's hand-drawn map of Greyfriars Graveyard. There were little ticks scattered across the page, presumably marking the sites of the recently buried corpses ripe for stealing. Looking closer at the map, he suddenly noticed that one plot was marked with a tiny cross rather than a tick. He held the book closer and, peering at the minuscule marking, was it a cross? Or was it a sword? Then suddenly Charlie knew exactly where Excalibur was. He leapt to his feet, opened the boarding house window, climbed onto the sill, and without a second's hesitation, swung out and clambered down the drain pipe. Soon he was walking through the silent, deserted streets once more, his mind in turmoil. He reached the big top, let himself in, and felt his way to the little vault in Southbridge, where the workmen kept their tools. He took out one of the construction helmets with the light on top, put it on his head and wrapped a short shovel in a splattered paint sheet. Then he let himself out to the theatre again and strode through the old town until he stood at the gates of Greyfriars Graveyard. The cemetery looked very different at night. The church seemed to be carved from squat, cold shadows, and gravestones were scattered across the inky lawns like blackened stumps of teeth. Charlie switched on the torch and made his way quietly round the church until he came to the grave of Alan Ramsay, hidden in thick shadow at the bottom of the building. Hands shaking, he unwrapped the shovel, looked around to see if his actions might be detected, but the graveyard was deserted and all the lights were off in the surrounding tenements. He opened Peasel's journal at the back, studied the exact position of the cross. Here we go, the boy muttered, the last of the body snatchers. He took a deep breath and plunged the shovel into the soil a few feet from the flat tombstone and began to dig. He worked in silence, trying to keep his breathing as quiet as possible. He didn't want anyone sneaking up behind him whilst he was busy digging up a grave in the middle of the night. Soon there was a mound of earth beside him and a widening hole at his feet. Suddenly, the point of the shovel hit something solid. Please don't let that be someone's head, Charlie muttered, digging tentatively around the spot, but the object he was uncovering glinted in his helmet beam. It was made of metal. The sky was beginning to lighten, so he scraped hurriedly at the dirt, and soon he had uncovered a beautiful sword handle. Hardly daring to breathe, he bent down, grasped the handle, and pulled. Excalibur slid slowly and easily from the soil next to the grave of Peasel's hero, and Charlie held the dirt-covered weapon aloft, saluting his companion from the past. "You did hide the sword," he laughed, wiping dirt from the hilt with his sleeve. "You took the jewel and left the sword in case someone else needed to use it." His voice trailed away as the last of the graveyard earth fell from the hilt. The jewel was still there, gleaming in its silver setting. He sat down on Alan Ramsay's tombstone, looking at the beautiful sword, and a great feeling of sadness welled up inside him. Partly he was uncertain and scared, but partly he couldn't understand how he had got into an incredible situation like this. But mostly he was sad for Peasel. He didn't know why the jewel was buried with the sword, but the fact it was still there meant that Peasel, Shadowjack and Duncan couldn't have got rich after all. Without money, the pickpocket wouldn't have been able to afford proper medicine. Charlie didn't think that Peasel could have lasted much longer after finishing his diary. The boy felt a welcome warmth on his back as the sun began to rise over the eastern wall of the graveyard. He raised Excalibur above his head and let the rays of the new day dance along its blade. "Thank you, my friend," he whispered. He stood up and made a few practiced cuts at the air with the weapon. He had no idea how to wield a sword, but Excalibur was light and somehow it felt right in his hand. He edged his way around Ramsay's grave, slashing at imaginary foes, imagining he was Arturius, surrounded by the army of the Gorodon Wrath. He clutched his heart. "You got me, you pesky varmints," he croaked, staggering backwards and forwards. "But before I die, I'll chase you down to the very gates of hell and seal you in." Charlie stopped, Excalibur quivering in the air. "I don't get it." He lowered the sword and frowned. Why would the Gorodon Wrath retreat into a tunnel where they knew they could be trapped? Why didn't they just run away? He thought back to Peasel's diary. As dawn broke, the Gorodon Wrath finally fled and took shelter in the caverns under Arthur's seat. Charlie looked at the golden orb getting higher over the graveyard wall. As dawn broke, of course. A grin of comprehension spread slowly across his face. There was something else that the Gorodon Wrath feared as much as fairy silver. They were afraid of daylight. Oh, brilliant. We're getting near the end. But I hope you guys have kept on cleaning your teeth every evening, washing your hands diligently, and now snuggle in. Nice big cuddle. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Bye night.